This podcast is made possible by financial support from our listeners. If you're not supporting us yet, check out 90milesfromneedles.com/donate or text the word needles to 53555.
Think the deserts are barren wastelands? Think again. It's time for 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome to 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Clark. And quick heads up, this episode is going to be a little differently edited from the way we've been doing things over the last couple of years. Generally, when I put an episode together, I spend a lot of time going over as many aspects of the audio as I can. I listen to what's recorded 6 or 7 times to make sure that I catch all the glitches, which I never do. One of the things I learned while I was editing print publications is that the best way to look for typos is to publish the thing and then open it up, and the typos just jump right off the page at you. And that certainly happens with editing this podcast. I listen after we've published an episode and find lots of things I wish I would have changed. But I do like to catch as many problems as I can as I edit. If I'm talking by myself in a studio, like right now, I usually will do several takes to make sure I like the way things sound. But I'm going to have to approach this episode a little bit differently, and that's because I'm preoccupied. My dog Hart, who has been with me for, it'll be 10 years in November, is having extreme dizziness, vertigo, and nausea, nystagmus, which is rapid uncontrollable eye movements. This is almost certainly a disorder in her inner ear. Vestibular disorder is what it's called. Older dogs do get that. And if that's what it is, it probably will resolve itself in a few days or maybe as long as a couple of weeks, but I am continually needing to be on guard here. Hart gets up and can't stand up, and she falls over. And we don't have the most childproof place here. She could get hurt if she falls. And we have a 1-story house, but there are still steps that she's got to go up and down and slippery tile floors. And it's just been really hard for the last couple days. And I will cop to this. Those of you who know me pretty well know that I fall in love with my dogs. For a long time, I had a really wonderful dog named Zeke who lived to a ripe old age. He made it almost to his 16th birthday. And he was a good-sized dog, 50 pounds or so in his prime. And so living 16 years was an accomplishment. When he passed, even though we had been preparing for it for several months, because he did slide for a while, it really messed me up. It did a number on my emotional health. It took me years to recover. I never got over it, because you don't get over it. You just get used to it. It's been longer since he died than he was alive. It's going to be 18 years next February. But his passing knocked me for a loop. And I am not saying that's about to happen with Hart. I mean, it's certainly possible, but Hart is a really healthy dog. There's a very good chance that this is going to resolve itself. Her immune system is going to do the job, and she's going to be her usual pesky, annoying self within a week or so. And she is going to the vet in a couple days. Our hopes are high that she will be well, but in the meantime, I have limited bandwidth because I have to keep an eye on her. If she gets up to try to walk somewhere, I need to go follow her, so I can't really focus on listening to multiple takes. Those of you who have ADHD, like me, understand the way the house can burn down around you when you're hyper-focused on something, and that usually happens to me when I'm really involved in editing an episode. But it can't happen this week. So there may well be awkward things that you hear, weird pauses, dead air that's a little bit longer than recommended, ums and ahs, and maybe a mouth smack or two, that kind of stuff. Now, it's just me talking. We're not doing an interview this time around, but I did want to give you that heads up, and I thank you for your forgiveness and your forbearance. This episode might be a little bit more rough sounding than usual. I will keep you updated on how Hart is doing. She's a good dog, and she appreciates your patience with me very much. And if you want to learn more about Zeke, there is a book that I wrote back in the day called Walking with Zeke, which is available online at all the usual places. I like bookshop.org, but you can find it just about anywhere.
Great, wow, it's good. Woo, it's hot. Yeah. Yeah, it's great, wow, it's good. Woo, it's hot. Yeah. Yeah, it's great, wow, it's good. Woo, it's hot. Yeah. Woo, it's hot. 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 It's hot.
As I speak, the National Weather Service has put out a bunch of extreme weather alerts that involve heat. Excessive heat watches have been released within the last few hours for El Paso, Texas, for most of Arizona from the Grand Canyon all the way down to Ajo and Oregon Pipe and Tucson, most of southern Nevada, most of the California desert, and the Weather Service is warning about temperatures that may reach as high as 110 in most places. And in Death Valley, they're likely to reach up to 120 or even hotter. And this is a really, really dangerous time in the desert. It gets hot in the desert every year, granted, but the number of days that it gets that hot is increasing. And that's likely as a result of climate change. The number of nights in which the temperature doesn't drop down to a comfortable level is also increasing. And that's really a problem for human health. So here's how this episode's going to go in reverse order because I'm just that kind of guy. We're going to close with simple tips that you can take to stay safe in desert heat. Before that, because it's really important to recognize the symptoms of heat injury, we'll go through the different kinds of heat injury, what they feel like, what you should do to correct them or mitigate them, and when to call 911. But first, there's an additional danger from heat that I hadn't really thought of until pretty recently. I hope we all know that heavy exertion and weather above 100 degrees is, even if you're acclimated to it, it's dangerous. Even if you've been living in the desert for a long time and it's been above 100 degrees for the last several weeks and you're increasing your outdoor unprotected time slowly, you can get used to the heat a little bit. I mean, from my own personal experience, it used to be that 113 Fahrenheit was my limit for doing anything that required thinking. I had a car that didn't have air conditioning. Up to 113, I could drive and be really uncomfortable and unhappy, but nonetheless, as safe a driver as I ever am. My attention would stay on the road. Past 113, all bets were off. I generally tried not to drive. That limit is actually around 118 now that I've been living in the desert for 16 years. But, it's still dangerous. And there's a danger that didn't occur to me, possibly because I'm less vulnerable to it than a lot of people, as you are probably too. But there was a study that came out a little bit more than a year ago that kind of surprised me. Study published in the Journal of Burn Care and Research in the March-April issue in 2023. It's been online since September 2022. I'll have the link in the show notes in case you want to look at it. But the study is entitled Temperature Profiles of Sunlight-Exposed Surfaces in a Desert Climate, Determining the Risk for Pavement Burns. And maybe you, like me, had not even thought of the concept of pavement burns other than just when you have to walk across a hot driveway in bare feet or on the beach on a sunny day. What the researchers did was they took a bunch of different kinds of surfaces and little plots, lava rock, asphalt, brick, concrete, ungalvanized metal, sand, and on a summer day, on the rooftop of a 4-story building on the University of Nevada campus in Las Vegas, they had all these surfaces exposed to sun. They were on top of that building, so there was not much in the way of local vegetation to cool things down or anything like that. If you know the UNLV campus, it's pretty urban. So on the day that they measured temperatures, of these different substances, which was August 6, 2020, at 2:10 in the afternoon. Air temperature in Las Vegas was 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And the sun was about as bright as it gets that day. 940 watts per square meter. The theoretical maximum for solar radiation on the surface of planet Earth is 1,000 watts per square meter. So 940 watts per square meter is basically full blazing sun. They found that the material was in full sun got, depending on which material we're talking about, as much as 50 degrees hotter than the ambient air temperature of 120. Maximum recorded temperatures for the different surfaces were as follows: lava rock 170, asphalt 166, brick 152, concrete and metal were both 144, sand was 143. Those are numbers. They might not have any emotional relevance to you, but then I went and looked at another study which was called Children at Risk for Accidental Burns from Hot Tap Water. So, a lot of the research on temperatures at which human skin suffers injury have focused on hot water. People work with hot water all the time, even in cold places in the middle of winter. So there's been some study put into this. The National Institutes of Health says that water at a temperature of 52 degrees C or 125 degrees Fahrenheit can cause a full thickness skin burn in 2 minutes. Full thickness skin burn is also known as the third degree burn, which basically destroys all of the skin. The epidermis, the outer layer, the dermis, and the subcutaneous fat. Hot water at 140 degrees Fahrenheit can lead to a serious burn within 3 seconds. There is a little bit of difference you need to take into account between hot water burns and surface burns. Water conducts heat extremely well. Nonetheless, you can probably assume that within a degree or 3, you get roughly equivalent results. So the article in the Journal of Burn Care and Research, which I will link in the show notes, says that you can get a serious burn, and not just painful, but serious as in need of medical attention, walking barefoot across a sunlit driveway for 3 seconds when it's 120 degrees out. Every one of the surfaces tested in the pavement burn study had elevated surface temperature high enough to cause contact burns. This is a public safety issue, but it's also a public health issue. It's really, really easy to find stuff on social media talking about don't walk your dog when it's hot out in the desert, with charts saying if it's 90 degrees air temperature, then the temperature of the sidewalk is going to be X number of degrees hotter. Basically, if you can't hold your hand on the surface where you're going to be walking your dog, you need to put boots on your dog or wait until nighttime to walk the dog. And most people aren't deliberately going out and touching incredibly hot sun-illuminated concrete, gravel, or asphalt on a day with hot temperatures in the desert. But there are some folks who, for one reason or another, have no choice. The study says, for instance, that people can develop third-degree burns on that concrete if they fall and or have a syncopal event. Syncope is fainting. People can develop third-degree burns if they fall or faint and remain on the pavement for several minutes. Not an hour, not 3 hours, several minutes. Third-degree burns. This is increasingly a serious consideration for people who are homeless, people with mental health issues, the elderly. It's easy enough to get overheated if you're walking around. Syncope events do sometimes come with heat injury, heat stroke, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about how to prevent that heat injury so that you don't end up passing out on the sidewalk and getting badly burned. But I just thought it was worth some thought because, the difference between the way we treat our dogs and the way we treat people that are forced to be outside for one reason or another is pretty striking. There's plenty of charts, like I said, that show you how hot it is for your dog's feet on pavement when it's hot out and it's sunny. And I don't remember seeing a lot of public service announcements saying, if you fall asleep on the sidewalk, you will get third-degree burns. I don't really have a solution there. It's not just homeless people. It's not just people with emotional or mental illness issues. It's not just relatively comfortable folks like me who are getting up there in years and misjudged their capacity for dealing with the heat. We're talking about people that are doing minimum wage jobs and have no choice but to be outside, parking lot attendants and roofers and agricultural labor. And we're also talking about people who are out in the desert for other reasons. We're talking about people who are coming across the border. We are going to be seeing a lot of deaths from heat injury and also from burns that go untended. And it's just, I think we need to be aware of this. I don't have an answer to it other than combating climate change and being kinder to one another, even if we're from different backgrounds and have different economic circumstances. I don't have a solution, but I do think we ought to think about it. So for a lot of us, the best way to avoid having this kind of serious injury from the heat is to avoid having the heat catch up with you. As you want to pay close attention to how you're feeling on hot days like these and recognize the signs and symptoms of heat injury before they get too bad. So let's talk about those different levels of heat injury and their symptoms a little bit based on material from the website of the Centers for Disease Control. We'll talk about them in ascending order of seriousness because the sooner you figure out that you're having some trouble with the heat and do something to counteract that, the better off you're going to be. Probably the least serious heat injury is called heat rash. I mean, I get that so often I don't even think of it as an injury. Basically, itchy red clusters of small blisters that look like pimples on the skin, and they will be in places where you sweat a lot or where your body folds up against itself and gets hotter than usual. The neck, the chest, the groin, inside your elbow creases. If you see heat rash, you want to stay in a cool, dry place, keep the rash dry, and put something on to soothe the rash. Cornstarch can work pretty well, in my experience. You might try aloe vera, something like that. The next stage up in heat injury, of course, is sunburn. We've all had it. You get painful red and warm skin. Sometimes you'll get blisters. The majority of sunburns are annoying and irritating, but not necessarily needing medical attention. If you're badly blistered, you want to see if you can talk to a medical professional. Do not break the blisters. Breaking the blisters is just asking to get infections inside your skin. You want to stay out of the sun. You want to use something to soothe the irritation. Take a cool bath or a cool shower, cold compresses. Wear opaque clothing over the area that you got sunburned if you do have to go out. And if you get sunburned a lot, you want to pay attention to changes in your skin because that's one of the biggest contributors to various skin cancers that you can possibly have. The next level of seriousness in heat injury is what is commonly called heat cramps. You might get these during exercise, even exercise as low key as walking, working out, or just working. If you start sweating incredibly heavily and have muscle pain or spasms, those are very likely heat cramps. They are basically tied to dehydration and lack of electrolytes. You want to stop what you're doing, move to someplace cooler, drink some water. If you have an electrolyte drink, that'll work too. And do not continue what you're doing until those cramps go away. I had heat cramps at one point on a backpacking trip, the first day of a backpacking trip. It was relatively warm and we were climbing, getting onto the John Muir Trail near Yosemite, and it was just too warm even though it was complete shade. It was a forested path heading up towards the high country, and my calves just decided to go on strike and stopped working and were incredibly painful. And I was sitting in the middle of the trail with my pack off, actually in tears from the pain and punching my calves. And what worked best was drinking a bunch of water, waiting for the pain to lessen, and then getting the last mile to the campsite, putting my feet up. And that was what I needed to do. I wasn't in a position where I could just sit there for the rest of the day. I had to keep going. But if you can stop doing what you're doing until the cramps are fully gone, that is the best thing. If the cramps last longer than an hour, or you have heart problems, or you're on a low sodium diet on the advice of a dietitian or your doctor or something like that, you want to get medical help as soon as possible. It's taking those electrolytes. You don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. Heat exhaustion is characterized by heavy sweating, cold, pale, clammy skin, fast, weak pulse, nausea or vomiting, muscle cramps, tiredness or weakness, dizziness, headache, fainting, and obviously that last one is extremely relevant and extremely dangerous given what we've been talking about with possibility of pavement burns increasing in desert cities as the climate warms. If you feel any of those things, you want to move to someplace cooler, loosen your clothes, get in a cool bath or put cool wet cloths on your body and sip water. Do not guzzle water. I have to remind myself of that a lot. You sip the water, otherwise nausea might kick in and you'll just get more dehydrated. And if you are throwing up or your symptoms get worse or your symptoms last longer than an hour, get medical help right away. Lastly, heat stroke. And this is really more for people who are with you, or if you are with somebody who is experiencing this, once they get to the point of heat stroke, they are not going to be able to help themselves much. Heat stroke involves high body temperature, 103 Fahrenheit or higher, hot, red, dry, or damp skin, fast, strong pulse, headache, dizziness, nausea, confusion, and losing consciousness. You want to call 911 or the equivalent right away. Heat stroke will kill you fast if it's not taken care of. Move the person to a cooler place. Help lower the person's temperature with cool cloths or a cool bath. Do not give the person anything to drink. Again, it's that nausea issue. You do not want them to start barfing and lose more water than they're gaining. Of course, the best way to mitigate heat injury is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And to that end, we have a few time-honored methods for just taking care of yourself, making sure that you don't put yourself in a situation where the heat will get the best of you. And we're not just talking triple-digit temperatures here. These are important. When the temperature rises above the low 80s, depending on your physical condition, on how used you are to the desert, how much water you have with you, and where you are, what you're planning to do, all these measures can keep you safe, even if it feels like it's a little warm, not too warm to be crazy. So, these tips are from the Anza Borrego Foundation. They've been compiled here, but you can find lots of different versions of these tips, and there are 10 of them. 1, always research the weather before heading out. You want to know what temperature it's going to be at what time of the day. You might have a perfectly good 72-degree morning, a lot of cloud cover, and if you set out on a 10-mile hike and you don't realize that at about 1 in the afternoon, the clouds are going to go away and it's going to jump by 25 degrees, you're going to be in trouble. So you want to do your research first. 2, and this is really important, avoid heat peak times. Avoid peak hot by heading outside in the early morning or the late afternoon. And even then, you want to cut things short. Early morning for a lot of people sometimes means 10. We're talking like 5, 6 in the morning. The third tip, stay hydrated. Bring tons of water. If you're bringing a 12-ounce plastic bottle full of water, you're asking for trouble. You want at least a liter of water for a short hike. You should always have more water than you need because there may be an emergency and you could get stuck outside longer than you thought you were going to. You could run into somebody that needs water and didn't bring enough. This happens to me pretty much whenever I hike in a place like the Grand Canyon, I bring extra water because I assume I'm going to find somebody that is out of water and in trouble. So bring more water than you think you're going to need. And if you are hiking and you realize that you are halfway through your water supply, turn around. Turn around sooner than that if you've been hiking downhill and your return route is uphill. Hiking without water is unpleasant at best. It is dangerous at worst. And it's not just a question of staying safe and staying alive. Being hydrated can mean the difference between enjoying your hike and having it be a hellacious slog. You get dehydrated, your blood starts to get thicker, your heart has to work harder, so you're going to be pumping that sort of thick blood through your heart. Your heart's going to be working harder. It's going to be harder to stay oxygenated, so you're going to breathe harder. Water is your friend. The fourth one, and this is something I am not great at, so I'm reminding myself as much as I'm reminding you. Always let someone know your itinerary, including where you're going and when you plan to return. I usually, at the very least, I have a satellite beacon that it's not a cheap thing. It costs like $300 a year for the membership and about that for the item itself. But I will carry that with me on hikes where I am not familiar with the landscape. And I'll usually send my wife a text saying, this is where I parked, with the location. But barring that, let someone know your itinerary, including your plans for your hiking destination and when you plan to return. There is another tip, I think, that is really useful for search and rescue folks who are going to be looking for you. And more on that in a minute. But if you have a sheet of paper on your dashboard on which you have put the pattern of the tread of your boot soles, your hiking boots, you can just take a picture of them and print that out and put it up, or whatever that is. That helps search and rescue folks know who they're looking for, know whose treks they're looking at. If you are hiking through the desert, there are going to be a lot of places where you can leave footprints. That's just a really handy hint. 5, and if you paid attention to the previous part of this episode, you're way ahead. Learn to recognize heat-related illnesses. And the symptoms will vary, but all that headache, dry skin, high body temperature, rapid pulse, dizziness, confusion, pay attention to all of that. Wear lightweight, loose. This is 6. Number 6, wear lightweight, loose, breathable, and light-colored clothing. And bonus, if it has an SPF of 50 or more, my much-missed former co-host turned me on to this company that has bamboo fiber long-sleeve shirts that are really easy to wear even if it's hot. They are not suitable for formal wear because they do show your sweat, but they make you really comfortable. And just find something that is going to reflect light, not absorb it, and that will keep those UV rays from getting to your body. Number 7, avoid dehydrating drinks such as alcohol, coffee, or tea. And if you will be sweating, drink something with electrolytes in it, or salty snacks are good. And again, this is a reminder for me because I can't even find my backpack if I don't have at least 2 cups of coffee in the morning. So just keep them in mind. And if you have been out drinking the night before and you plan to get up early, fight through your hangover with a cup of coffee and then go out for a hike, maybe reconsider, because hangovers are at least 75% dehydration. And if you're starting off like that, you want to maybe think about moving your morning hike to the late evening. Number 8, use sunblock, sunglasses, and a hat. All very important. Number 9, stay in the shade as much as possible and rest frequently. Slot canyons are great for that, by the way. Out here, there's not a lot of shade trees. You do find some here and there, and you find interesting critters that are occupying the shade you want to occupy. Some of them really violently resent you taking their shade away. So plan accordingly. There's a company called Gossamer Gear. This is an unpaid plug. They have a relatively inexpensive desert hiking umbrella that is shiny silver on the outside. It's black on the bottom side that, it gives a good rest for your eyes. And I have used that umbrella a couple of times in long, hot desert hikes, and it's come in really handy. They're not great for windy, hot desert hikes, but if you are in a place where there's lots of canyons, and so I used it in Saguaro National Park a couple of years ago, a very strenuous hike, and I found myself a little spot in a wash that had enough shade for my feet, and so I shaded my head with the umbrella, and it was pretty comfortable for 15 minutes or so to catch some rest. Lastly, number 10, and this is the hint that everybody ignores: create a backup plan. Sometimes it is just too hot to be outdoors. You want to have plan B, Netflix, eating popcorn, drinking some interesting beverages, and staying inside, playing Scrabble, whatever it is. Or even going to an outdoor cafe and sitting under the misters, having an omelet, that kind of thing. Because here's the thing, folks. There's a lot going on in the desert. We appreciate you wanting to come here and experience it. And I gotta say, I totally understand wanting to experience it in all of its faces. The surprisingly cold winter storms, monsoons, beautiful and abundant spring blooms, and that includes the heat. And I will confess that when I hear about the likelihood of record-breaking heat at Furnace Creek in Death Valley National Park, I look at my schedule and see if I can get there, just in case we get to that 135 or 136 degree mark, busting the questionable historic record. I want to know what that feels like, and I know what it'll feel like, and it will be unpleasant, but I feel like I want to bear witness to that. So I understand the urge to test yourself and to feel the extremes and all that kind of stuff. And you just got to plan carefully, and you got to have common sense about it, and you got to recognize sometimes that you just need to do something else. Because in the immortal words of Ranger Pam, who I met at Phantom Ranch in the bottom of the Grand Canyon in the summer of 2005, as we all prepared to hike back out of the canyon to the south rim, she was telling us what to do and what not to do. Testosterone is not an electrolyte replacement. Truer words were never spoken. And that wraps up yet another episode of 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast. Want to thank new donors Dara Weaver, Joshua Kierstadt, and Keith Brennan, along with Jim Dyer, who is not a first-time donor, but he did drop a generous donation on us that he claims came from bottle deposits. It's a likely story. I would also like to thank our voiceover artist, Joe Jeffrey, and our visual artist, Martine Mancha, who did our wonderful podcast artwork. Our theme song, Moody Western, is by Brightside Studio. That very up-tempo song at the beginning of the episode, Whoa, It's Hot, is by Sync Hits via envato.com. And the piece we just heard, Cowboy in the Desert, came from the royalty-free selection of music in the app Descript. Descript doesn't seem to include artist info. We want artist info so we can credit. Do better, Descript. And I am going to go check on my dog. I really appreciate your patience with this episode. I hope it helps. And we will see you at the next watering hole. Bye now.
"90 Miles from Needles" is a production of the Desert Advocacy Media Network.